The Elizabeth Line is London's newest railway, running all the way from Reading in the west to Shenfield in the east. But why Shenfield? I mean, don't get me wrong, Shenfield seems like a nice enough town, but why, of all the places the line could end, does it end here? Well, it turns out this is not some arbitrary thing. There's a whole series of historical reasons for it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Shenfield, not to be confused with Sheffield, despite what my spell check thinks, is a station in Essex. Shenfield is a suburb of Brentwood, which in turn is a fair way east of London. When the station was first built, it was just another station, really. It opened under the Eastern Counties Railway in 1843, then it closed in 1850 because hardly anyone was using it. This is not a promising start. Stick with me here, because we're going to get into some railway politics. Basically, the situation was that in the early years of the railways, people who knew nothing about railways went a bit nuts with their proposals for new lines. Some of those lines turned out to be works of genius that made their backers very rich. Others, probably the majority in fact, did not. East Anglia is short of the kinds of industry that provide the kinds of heavy freight that railways need in order to be profitable. And that's where the Eastern Counties was, unfortunately for them. In 1862, the Eastern Counties Railway merged with a bunch of other railways in East Anglia to form the Great Eastern Railway, in the hope that without the need to compete, they could stop hemorrhaging money for maybe 10 seconds. The plan worked, a bit. The only potential spanner in the works was a company known as the London, Tilbury and Southend Railway. This had originally been part-owned by the Eastern Counties Railway, which made sense since it served places that were very much on their turf. It became an independent company in 1862, but its board of directors included enough chaps from the new Great Eastern Railway to give them a significant amount of control. You might expect them to attempt a takeover, especially since this was a new main line serving some important destinations that were right in the middle of Great Eastern Territory. But they just didn't. Instead, in 1875, the LTSR became independent. So, instead, the Great Eastern decided to build their own line to Southend. Shenfield was a convenient place for a junction station. The site had been lying abandoned. The company had proposed moving their goods depot at Ingatestone there, but that scheme had been abandoned, following a somewhat acrimonious meeting to discuss the matter, leading to an argument and a physical assault. But fortunately there were no such arguments about reopening the station to passengers, and so that's what the Great Eastern did on the 1st of January 1887. It was now called Shenfield and Hutton Junction officially, but most people seem to have just called it Shenfield anyway. Meanwhile, another market was opening up, and that was for commuter services. The Great Eastern loved commuter services. London was growing, the rail network was growing, and people were increasingly moving out of the centre of town. The Great Eastern's London terminus, Liverpool Street, was one of the few mainline stations in the city proper, so their trains were absolutely rammed. They responded by providing the most intense suburban rail service in the world. Several measures were put in place to increase efficiency. A train would come into Liverpool Street, the engine would be uncoupled, another engine would couple onto the other end, and they'd be off again in 4 minutes. To speed up loading, the carriages would be painted with brightly coloured stripes to indicate from a distance where the train was going. This led to the services being nicknamed the Jazz Trains, a nickname that lasted right up until the end of steam. Vital to this efficient running was separating the commuter lines from the fast lines. So in the late 19th century, a programme of quadrupling was undertaken. That is to say, there would now be 2 lines for commuter trains and 2 lines for everything else. Shenfield was the outer limit of this quadrupling. Well, being a junction station, it was a fairly convenient place to stop. So you've got 2 separate, intensively worked commuter lines from Liverpool Street to Shenfield, and these were what would basically become the eastern part of the Elizabeth line. But there was a long way to go before that would happen. See, while the Great Eastern Railway described their commuter services as the last word in steam-operating suburban services, the early 20th century saw the rapid spread of a technology that could leave steam in the dust. Electrification. Electric trains were not only clean and modern compared to steam trains, but they could accelerate and decelerate more rapidly. It was just what the Great Eastern needed, but they couldn't afford it. While their suburban services were very profitable, they were also having to prop the rest of their network up. And while they were counting the pennies, underground and tram lines were opening up and threatening those profitable commuter lines. The Great Eastern weren't the only railway struggling, and so in 1923 the mainline railways of Britain were grouped together in what was known as the grouping. It was the same deal as when the Great Eastern had first been formed, really, but on a larger scale. The profitable lines could cover the unprofitable ones. But the Great Eastern had been absorbed into the London and North Eastern Railway, and the LNER was almost all unprofitable railways. The lines in the North East did well, thanks to lots of minerals and heavy industry, but everywhere else, not so much. The LNER were being pressured to electrify their commuter lines, but they couldn't afford to do so. But the Underground, the very thing that had posed such a threat to the Great Eastern, would throw them a lifeline. In 1933, London's public transport services, minus the mainline railways, would be amalgamated into London Transport. 2 years later, the New Works programme was announced. This was a sort of collaboration between London Transport and the mainline companies to revamp the transport network in London. There was a lot to this, but the relevant part was that London Transport would take some of the LNER's financially failing branch lines in and around London off their hands, and plug those into the Underground. That would free up resources for the LNER to electrify their commuter routes. The route to Shenfield was specifically picked as a priority, including the necessary infrastructure for trains to run from Shenfield to Fenchurch Street. It was a great plan, with one drawback: World War II. That put all the works on hold and drained just about everyone's coffers. So when it was time to resume work after the declaration of peace, there was very little money to do so. The electrification of the line to Shenfield did go ahead, although the Fenchurch Street section was dropped in 1949. In the meantime, the railways of Britain were nationalised in 1948. In 1949, Shenfield was finally on the juice, and electric trains served it for the first time. The final piece in the puzzle is the addition of the Shenfield service to the Elizabeth line, which, of course, wouldn't come until the 21st century. But that's not to say that the idea was new. The basic concept of an express rail route under London was being considered by London Transport in the 30s. In 1974, in the London Rail Study, this was refined into the Crossrail project, a rail tunnel between Paddington and Liverpool Street that would come out onto the suburban rail routes. The story of how the Elizabeth line got built is a long and complicated one, as you might imagine, what with it taking nearly 50 years from the London Rail Study to opening. But suffice it to say that it was officially approved in 2008. In 2015, the line to Shenfield was taken over by TfL Rail, which was kind of an intermediate stage between conventional rail and Crossrail. In May 2022, the core of what was now called the Elizabeth line was opened, and a year later, services began all the way to Shenfield. The line to Shenfield was a natural endpoint for the Elizabeth line, largely due to a set of complicated historical circumstances. The tracks were wholly separate, so out here the purple trains can run as the fast and frequent service they were intended to be. It's just a shame we can't say the same for the western section, where the line is compromised by the need to share with other trains. I guess the message is clear. The best way to get a perfect railway is to start 100 years ago. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do consider leaving a like and perhaps subscribing for more. If you'd like to know a bit more, the two books I consulted for historical background were The Great Eastern Railway by Charles Phillips and Liverpool Street to Ilford by J.E. Connor. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon and here on YouTube for your much appreciated support. You are the separation to my commuter lines. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.